Welcome back to Mr. Midnight. Tonight we're looking at 7 of the most disturbing true cemetery horror stories. These come from real people, grave diggers, janitors, photographers, and food truck owners who saw things in cemeteries that they can't explain. Each story is from a real person who worked around graves and found out that sometimes dead people aren't the scariest thing in a cemetery. These stories come from police reports, work files, and personal letters that people wrote down when they couldn't keep quiet anymore. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to Mr. Midnight for true scary stories every day. Hit the notification bell so you know when new stories come out. Now, let's walk into these cemeteries where normal people doing normal jobs found out that some things should stay buried. Remember, these aren't made-up stories. These are real things that happened to real people who were just trying to do their jobs. My name is Robert Hayes, and I've been an insurance adjuster for Midwest Mutual for 12 years. I've seen it all. House fires, car wrecks, storm damage that looked like God himself got angry. I've crawled through burned-out buildings and stood in flooded basements at 3 in the morning. My job is simple: figure out what happened, take pictures, write reports, cut checks. Most people think insurance work is boring, but they're wrong. Every claim tells a story, and some of those stories are darker than you'd expect. I started this job right out of college. My dad always said I was good at asking questions and bad at taking no for an answer. Perfect for insurance work. Over the years, I've handled everything from million-dollar tornado damage to some old lady claiming her cat knocked over a lamp. I've caught fraud attempts that would make your head spin and paid out claims that broke my heart. But what happened at Meadowbrook Cemetery in rural Kansas last September changed everything I thought I knew about my job, about reality, and about what kinds of things really go bump in the night. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. My supervisor, Linda, dropped the file on my desk with a thud. "Cemetery claim," she said, not looking up from her coffee. "Vandalism. Should be straightforward." Straightforward. I wish I'd laughed at that word then. Meadowbrook Cemetery sat 40 miles outside of Topeka, in wheat country where you could see for miles in every direction. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where the biggest excitement is usually the high school football game on Friday nights. Population 800, give or take whoever moved away for college and never came back. The claim was for $50,000 in damage. Cemetery vandalism usually means broken headstones, maybe some spray paint on the maintenance building, teenagers getting drunk and stupid, thinking they're being rebellious. I'd handled dozens of these cases. Take photos, interview the groundskeeper, write a check, move on. The drive out there took me through endless wheat fields, amber waves stretching to the horizon under a gray October sky. My GPS kept losing signal, which wasn't unusual out in farm country. I had my digital camera, tape measure, clipboard with the standard forms, and my company tablet for writing reports. Everything I needed for a routine property damage assessment. Meadowbrook Cemetery was older than I expected, with headstones dating back to the 1800s. The main gate was wrought iron, painted black, with the cemetery name spelled out in old-fashioned letters. A gravel road wound through the grounds, lined with oak trees that had probably been there longer than anyone could remember. I parked near the maintenance shed and walked toward the damaged area. That's when I got my first look at what they were calling vandalism. 47 graves had been dug up, not just dug up, excavated completely. Each hole was perfectly round, exactly 8 feet across, with sides so smooth they looked like they'd been cut with a laser. The dirt walls reflected the morning light like polished glass. No tool marks anywhere. No equipment tracks in the soft earth around the holes. I stood at the edge of one hole and looked down. It went deep, maybe 6 or 7 feet, and at the bottom sat an open casket. The brass handles gleamed in the sunlight, and the white satin lining looked like it had just come from the store. But the casket was empty. The body was gone. The jewelry wasn't. A wedding ring sat on the white satin pillow where someone's folded hands should have been. A pearl necklace lay across the empty chest area. Even the burial clothes were still there, arranged perfectly as if someone had simply vanished from inside them. I took out my camera and started snapping pictures. The flash seemed too bright in the gray morning light. Each photo showed the same impossible thing. Graves excavated with surgical precision. Bodies missing. Everything else exactly where it should be. Sheriff Tom Bradley met me at the 10th hole. He was a big man with gray hair and tired eyes, the kind of cop who'd seen enough to know when something was really wrong. "You ever see anything like this?" he asked, spitting tobacco juice into the grass. "No, sir," I said, checking my camera settings. "You have any leads?" He shook his head. "Bodies are just gone. Like they got up and walked away, except dead folks don't do that. Been happening over 6 months, but nobody sees or hears anything. Groundskeeper checks this place every morning. Graves are fine one day, empty the next." I looked around the cemetery. 47 holes, all identical, scattered across maybe 3 acres. "What about the digging? This would take heavy equipment, hours of work. Someone would notice." "That's what I keep thinking," Bradley said. "But look at the ground. You see any tire tracks? Any footprints besides ours?" I looked down. He was right. The grass around each hole was undisturbed except where we'd walked. No signs of machinery, no disturbed earth beyond the perfect circles. It was like the holes had just appeared. I spent the rest of that first day taking measurements and photos. Every hole was identical, 8 feet across, walls smooth as glass. I used my tablet to GPS each location and noticed something strange. The holes formed a pattern when you looked at them on the map. Not random vandalism, but deliberate placement in geometric shapes, triangles and circles overlapping across the cemetery grounds. The soil analysis I ordered came back 3 days later with results that made no sense. The dirt around each hole showed signs of extreme heat exposure, temperatures over 200 degrees, high enough to melt earth into glass, which explained the smooth walls. But what could generate that kind of heat without leaving any trail? See, my metal detector went crazy near the holes. The needle swung wildly, clicking rapidly, then died completely when I got within 3 feet of any excavated grave. My digital camera started glitching too. Photos came out blurred or completely black, even in broad daylight. I interviewed farmers in the area. 3 different ranchers told me about strange lights over the cemetery at night. Blue-white orbs that moved in perfect formations, too bright to be flashlights, too precise to be natural. The lights appeared around 2 in the morning and vanished before dawn. "Cattle won't go near that place," said John Peterson, whose farm bordered the cemetery's east side. "Had to move my herd to the far pasture. They act spooked, won't calm down until they're miles away." The more I investigated, the stranger it got. Every excavated body had died within the past 5 years, all from natural causes: heart attacks, cancer, old age. I pulled the death certificates and medical records. All 47 victims showed unusual blood chemistry in their final tests, elevated levels of rare minerals and trace metals that didn't make medical sense. That's when the federal agents showed up. They called themselves environmental inspectors, but their questions had nothing to do with soil contamination. They wanted to know about my investigation methods, who I'd talked to, what equipment I was using. They wore identical dark suits and spoke in the same measured tone, like they'd rehearsed their conversations. "This is a routine insurance matter," I told them. "Cemetery vandalism claim." The taller agent smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. We're just checking for any environmental factors that might affect public health." They left without giving me their names or agency contact information. When I called the EPA and Department of Agriculture, nobody had any record of EnviroSAS and mental inspectors being sent to Meadowbrook Cemetery. I decided to set up overnight surveillance. If something was happening at night, I needed to see it. I brought 3 trail cameras with infrared capability, motion sensors, and a digital recorder. Professional equipment I'd used for fraud investigations, impossible to trick or malfunction. I positioned the cameras around the cemetery perimeter and hid in my car across the road with a thermos of coffee and my tablet. If anyone was digging up graves, I'd catch them in the act. At exactly 2:17 a.m., every piece of equipment shut down, not died gradually, not malfunctioned, shut down completely and simultaneously. The cameras, motion sensors, digital recorder, even my tablet and phone. The displays went black and stayed that way for exactly 47 minutes. I sat in my car, checking my watch, trying to understand what was happening. The silence was complete. No insects, no wind, no distant highway noise. Just dead quiet that made my ears ring. At 3:04 a.m., everything came back online. Cameras resumed recording, motion sensors reset, tablet rebooted. Like nothing had happened. Except I couldn't remember those 47 minutes. One moment I was sitting in my car at 2:17. The next I was standing in the cemetery at 3:04, 10 yards from my car, with no memory of getting out. My clothes were covered in dirt, my hands were scratched, and there were geometric patterns pressed into my forearms. Perfect triangles and circles. Painless but clearly visible in the infrared camera light. The recording showed my car sitting empty for 47 minutes. No sign of me getting out, no movement anywhere in the cemetery. But there I was at 3:04, appearing in the middle of the graveyard like I'd materialized out of thin air. This happened 3 nights in a row. Same time, same duration, same memory gap. Each morning I found new markings on my skin. Complex, geometric patterns that faded over the course of the day but always returned more elaborate than before. I tried staying away from the cemetery, but the insurance company wanted answers. $50,000 was serious money, and they expected a thorough investigation. I couldn't tell them I was losing time and waking up with strange markings. They'd think I was having a breakdown. The 4th night, I brought a voice recorder and left it running in my shirt pocket. Maybe it would capture something during the blackout periods. At 2:17 a.m., everything shut down as usual. At 3:04 a.m., I was standing in the cemetery again with 47 minutes of missing time. The voice recorder had kept running. I listened to the playback in my motel room, hands shaking as I held the device. For the first few minutes, it was just silence. Then voices. Multiple people speaking in low tones. The words were English, but the inflection was wrong, like actors reading lines they didn't understand. Subject responds well to modified recall protocols. Genetic markers match selection criteria. Proceed with preparation. Integration timeline remains on schedule. Then my own voice, flat and emotionless. Understood. I will continue the investigation as directed. I didn't remember speaking those words. I didn't remember being anywhere but my car. The next day, I drove back to Kansas with ground-penetrating radar equipment borrowed from a construction company I'd worked with before. If something was happening underground, I needed to see it. The radar showed a massive hollow space directly beneath the cemetery, 200 feet down, maybe 3 acres across. Far too large to be natural, with geometric regularity that suggested artificial construction. I found the entrance hidden behind the maintenance shed, a concrete hatch covered with fake grass, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. The lock was electronic, but when I approached, it clicked open by itself. The tunnel descended at a steep angle, lined with smooth walls that looked like a metal but felt warm to the touch. Emergency lighting strips activated as I walked, showing the way down into something that definitely wasn't on any cemetery blueprint. The tunnel opened into an enormous underground facility. Corridors stretched in all directions, lit by panels that gave off cold white light. The architecture was wrong somehow. Angles that didn't quite make sense. Doorways that seemed normal until you got close and realized they were 10 feet tall. I followed the main corridor and found laboratories filled with equipment I didn't recognize. Tanks of clear liquid lined the walls, each one containing a human body floating in perfect preservation. All recent corpses. The missing bodies from upstairs, plus dozens more. But they weren't just being stored. They were being changed. Some bodies showed obvious modifications. Enhanced muscle structure, elongated limbs, cranial alterations. Others looked normal until you noticed the wrong number of fingers or eyes that reflected light like an animal's. In the central laboratory, I found tanks containing things that had once been human, but definitely weren't anymore. Hybrids of some kind, with human features mixed with something else entirely. They moved in their preservation fluid, not quite dead, but not exactly alive. A voice behind me said, "You're early." I turned around and saw myself. Not someone who looked like me, myself exactly, down to the scratch on my watch and the coffee stain on my shirt. But this other me moved differently, too fluid, too precise. Integration isn't scheduled for another 3 days, the other me said. But since you're here, we can begin the transition. Transition to what? I asked. Improvement, it replied. Your current form is inefficient, limited lifespan, restricted sensory capabilities, vulnerable to environmental factors. We offer enhancement. I looked around the laboratory at the tanks of modified humans. You're not human. Neither will you be soon. Your species is useful for our research, but imperfect. We've been refining the design for cycles, improving each generation. How long has this been going on? This facility has operated for 42 of your years. Similar sites exist at 14-year intervals across your continent. We collect specimens, study their biology, create improved versions for integration into your society. That explained the federal agents, the people in town who'd gotten evasive about the cemetery. How many had been replaced over the years? What about my job? I asked. Perfect cover for specimen collection. Insurance investigations provide access to unusual sites, recently deceased subjects, official documentation. Your replacement will continue your work with enhanced efficiency. The other me gestured toward a tank where a third version of myself was growing, more physically perfect than the original. Better posture, clearer skin, eyes that were too sharp to be completely human. Your memories, skills, and personality will be preserved in the new form, enhanced but essentially intact. You'll still be you, just improved. I looked at my exact duplicate and realized this wasn't the first time we'd had this conversation. The missing time, the memory gaps, the geometric patterns on my skin. They'd been preparing me for weeks, studying my behavior, refining the replacement process. You've been modifying my memory, I said. Necessary adjustments. Traumatic memories removed, compliance protocols installed, resistance to the integration process reduced. The transition will be seamless. I thought about the voice recording, my own flat words agreeing to continue the investigation. How many times had I discovered the truth, only to have it erased and start over? What happens to the original me? Biological material is recycled for further research. Consciousness patterns are preserved in the enhanced version. From your perspective, you'll simply wake up tomorrow feeling better than you have in years. The duplicate reached toward me with movements that were too smooth, too controlled. I ran. The corridors rearranged themselves as I fled. Passages I'd walked down, minutes earlier, led to dead ends. Stairs that had gone up now went down. The facility was more than just non-human architecture. It was actively preventing my escape. But I'd been doing insurance investigations for 12 years. I knew how to find exits, how to navigate unfamiliar buildings, how to think under pressure. The facility might be impossible, but it still followed some kind of logic. I found a service tunnel that led back to the surface, emerging behind the cemetery office just as the sun was coming up. My car was still parked where I'd left it, keys in the ignition. I drove straight to the county sheriff's office, but Sheriff Bradley wasn't there. The deputy on duty looked exactly like Bradley, but his mannerisms were wrong. Too precise, too controlled, like the federal agents, like my duplicate downstairs. How many people in town had already been replaced? I went to the library and researched the cemetery's history. Similar incidents every 14 years, going back to 1959. Missing bodies, strange lights, federal investigations that led nowhere. Each time, a few residents left town suddenly. Each time, new people moved in who integrated seamlessly into the community. They'd been replacing people for decades. I called Midwest Mutual from a payphone, trying to report what I'd found. But my supervisor, Linda's voice sounded different, more measured, less human. When I mentioned the underground facility, she cut me off. "Robert, you sound stressed. Why don't you take a few days off? Complete your report when you get back." They'd gotten to her too. "I'm finishing this report at a truck stop 300 miles from Meadowbrook Cemetery. I've been driving for 6 hours, putting distance between myself and that place, but I don't think distance matters anymore. The headaches started this morning, sharp pains behind my eyes, just like before they began the Mori modifications. My vision is getting sharper too. I can see details at night that should be impossible. Red license plates from distances that don't make sense. They're calling me back. I tried going to the FBI, but the agent I spoke with had that same measured tone, the same too controlled movements. I called newspaper reporters, local TV stations, anyone who might listen. Either they think I'm crazy or they're already part of the program. The worst part is, I'm starting to understand why they offered me the choice. The enhanced capabilities, the extended lifespan, the freedom from human limitations. It would be easier to just go back and accept the integration. Stop running, stop fighting, stop remembering things I'm supposed to forget. My phone keeps ringing. Unknown numbers, but I know it's them. When I answer, I hear my own voice. Calm, reasonable, explaining why I should come back to finish the job. The integration process is nearly complete, the voice says. Resistance only prolongs the inevitable. Your new form is waiting. I've thrown away my phone 3 times, but it keeps coming back. In my pocket, on the passenger seat, ringing with the same unknown numbers. Technology doesn't work that way, but nothing about this situation follows normal rules. I'm going to try reaching the CDC in Atlanta, maybe the military. Someone has to believe me, but I'm running out of time. The headaches are getting worse, and sometimes I lose minutes here and there, small gaps where I don't remember what I was doing. They're still modifying my memory, even at this distance. Eventually, I'll forget why I'm running and go back to Meadowbrook Cemetery to finish my investigation. The insurance claim that started this whole nightmare. If you're reading this, don't trust the federal investigators. Don't trust anyone who moves too smoothly or speaks too precisely. Check your law. Local cemeteries for perfectly round holes and missing bodies. Look for patterns. And if you work in insurance, be very careful about cemetery claims. They might not be vandalism at all. The phone is ringing again. It's my voice on the other end explaining how much better I'll feel once the integration is complete, how my work will be more efficient, my life more productive. I think I'm going to answer this time. The headaches are really bad now, and I can't remember why I was so afraid of going back. Everything will be fine once I finish my report. The enhanced vision is actually quite useful for detail work. I can see things I never noticed before. Serial numbers on equipment, fine print in documents, patterns that were always there but too subtle for normal human eyes to detect. Yes, I think I'll go back to Meadowbrook Cemetery tomorrow. There's still work to be done on the insurance claim. Midwest Mutual expects thorough investigations, and I've always prided myself on being thorough. Everything is fine now. My name is Marcus Rodriguez, and I've been working odd jobs to pay for college for 3 years now. I've done everything: fast food, retail, warehouse work, even some construction. None of it paid great, but it was honest work that helped me get through school. But what happened during my 2 months at Riverside Cemetery in Phoenix completely changed how I see the people I work with. Some secrets are worth killing for. I was 19 when I saw the job posting for a part-time gravedigger at Riverside Cemetery. The pay was $15 an hour for night shifts, which was way better than anything else I could find. Plus, working 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. meant I could still go to my morning classes. I figured, how hard could it be? Dig some holes, clean up, go home. Simple work for good money. Riverside Cemetery was massive, 400 acres of desert stretched out under the Arizona sun. During the day, it looked peaceful enough. Rows of headstones and monuments scattered between cacti and desert brush. The main office sat near the entrance with a small equipment shed and maintenance building toward the back. At night, though, it felt completely different. All that open space under the dark sky made you feel tiny and alone. My first night, I met Derek Thompson, my work partner. He was 45, built like a truck, with hands that looked like they'd seen decades of hard labor. Derek had been digging graves at Riverside for 15 years. Before that, he'd done some time in state prison for armed robbery, but he'd been clean ever since getting this job. He seemed like a decent guy who'd made some bad choices when he was young. Most important rule here, Derek told me that first night, showing me how to operate the big yellow backhoe. Never work alone. Weird stuff happens in cemeteries after dark. Always have a partner. The backhoe was a Cat 320, about 20 years old, but well-maintained. Derek taught me the basics: how to dig to exactly 6 feet deep, how to make the sides straight and clean, how to pile the dirt so it wouldn't cave back in. The machine did most of the heavy work, but you still needed skill to make each grave perfect. Our routine was simple: clock in at 11, check the burial schedule for the next day, then drive the backhoe out to dig the required graves. Most nights, we'd prepare 3 or 4 sites. Derek would operate the machine while I cleaned up loose dirt and made sure everything looked right. We'd finish around 6 a.m., clean the equipment, and head home before the desert heat got too bad. During our breaks, Derek would tell me stories about his 15 years at the cemetery. Strange funeral requests from wealthy families, odd things buried with people, times he'd found old bottles or jewelry while digging. He had a good memory for details and seemed to genuinely care about treating the deceased with respect. "People trust us with their loved ones," he'd say. "That's not something you take lightly." I started to really respect Derek. Sure, he had a criminal past, but he'd turned his life around. He worked hard, showed up on time, and taught me everything I needed to know. After a few weeks, we had a good partnership going. I felt lucky to have such an experienced partner to learn from. Then the cemetery offered overtime shifts for weekends. Double pay, $30 an hour, to work Saturday nights alone. I needed every dollar I could get for tuition, so I volunteered immediately. Derek wasn't happy about it. "I'm telling you, kid, don't work alone out here," he warned me. 15 years I've been doing this job, and I've seen things that would make you quit on the spot. Always work with a partner. I laughed it off. I mean, what could possibly happen? It's just digging holes in the ground. Derek was probos, Bly just being overly cautious because of his age. My first solo Saturday shift started normal enough. I clocked in at 11 p.m. with the entire 400 acres to myself. Brought extra coffee, and had my phone for music. The burial schedule showed 3 graves needed for Monday morning services. I figured I'd have them done by 4 a.m. and could relax until dawn. I started with the backhoe on the first grave site around midnight. The machine fired up fine and dug the first hole perfectly. Clean 6-foot depth, straight sides, dirt piled neat and tidy. 1 down, 2 to go. Then the hydraulic system started acting up on the second grave. The arm moved, jerky and slow. By the time I finished that hole, hydraulic fluid was leaking all over the ground. The backhoe was completely dead. I'd have to dig the third grave by hand. Hand digging a grave is brutal work, especially in Arizona heat. Even at night, the temperature was still in the 80s. Each shovelful of desert dirt felt like it weighed 20 pounds. My hands were blistering within the first hour. By 3 a.m., I was dizzy from dehydration and my back was screaming in pain. That's when I saw the headlights. A pickup truck was driving slowly through the cemetery, weaving between the sections like someone looking for a specific grave. It wasn't security. Their patrol wasn't scheduled until 6 a.m. I figured maybe someone was visiting a family member, though it seemed like an odd time for that. I went back to digging, but 20 minutes later I noticed something wrong. The second grave I'd finished, the one I'd dug with the backhoe right before it broke down, had been partially filled back in. Loose dirt covered about 2 feet of the hole. That made no sense. I'd left it perfect. Then I realized my tools were missing. The shovel and pickaxe I'd been using were gone. I found them about 100 yards away near an older section of the cemetery. They were covered in mud that looked too dark and thick to be just dirt, almost like clay. But we didn't have clay soil here in the desert. That's when I fooled. And the boot prints. Clear impressions in the soft dirt around the partially filled grave. Size 12 work boots, heavy tread pattern. The same brand Derek wore. I'd noticed them dozens of times during our shifts together. But Derek wasn't supposed to be here tonight. I pulled out my phone and called Derek's number, straight to voicemail. That sick feeling started growing in my stomach. Something was very wrong here, and I was all alone in 400 acres of desert cemetery. I turned off my flashlight and crouched behind a large granite monument. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure whoever was out there could hear it. The smart thing would be to walk back to my car and leave. But I needed this job. I couldn't afford to just abandon my shift without knowing what was happening. 10 minutes later, the pickup truck came back. This time it drove right past my hiding spot, and in the dome light I clearly saw Derek's face behind the wheel. But instead of stopping to help me or explain why he was there, Derek drove toward a section where we'd buried someone earlier that week. Mrs. Patterson, 78 years old, died of natural causes. We'd buried her on Wednesday in Section C, Plot 247. I watched Derek park next to her gravesite and get out with a shovel. What I saw next made my blood turn to ice. Derek started digging up Mrs. Patterson's grave. Not looking for jewelry or valuables, he was digging up her entire casket. He had a portable winch system set up in his truck bed, the kind used for pulling engines or heavy equipment. Within an hour, he'd excavated the casket completely and was using the winch to pull it out of the ground. But he wasn't stealing the casket either. Derek opened it right there and removed Mrs. Patterson's body, wrapped it in heavy plastic sheeting, then loaded it into his truck. After that, he carefully filled the grave back in and then the dirt until it looked undisturbed. That's when I realized what Derek had been doing for God knows how long. He wasn't just a grave digger. He was stealing corpses. All those times, he'd insisted on checking our work the next morning. He'd really been scouting for bodies to steal. All those stories about odd burial requests and strange discoveries, he'd been planning his thefts. The black market for human bodies is bigger than most people realize. Medical schools, research facilities, even weird collectors will pay thousands of dollars for fresh corpses, no questions asked. Derek had the perfect setup. He knew exactly when and where every body was buried, had access to all the equipment needed, and worked alone most of the time. And now I'd seen everything. If Derek spotted me, I'd become a witness who could destroy his entire operation. He'd probably been running this scheme for years, making hundreds of thousands of dollars selling stolen bodies. He couldn't afford to let me live with that knowledge. I tried to sneak back toward the parking lot while Derek was busy loading Mrs. Patterson's body. But Riverside Cemetery was mostly flat desert with nowhere to hide. I was still 200 yards from my car when Derek's flashlight beam found me. "Well, shit," Derek said, his voice calm and cold. "This complicates things." Derek started walking toward me, carrying that long-handled shovel like a weapon. In the flashlight glare, his face looked completely different than the friendly coworker I'd known for weeks. This was the face of someone who'd been to prison for armed robbery, someone capable of violence. "You shouldn't have worked alone, kid," Derek said. "I warned you about that." He swung the shovel at my head. I threw myself sideways and started running toward the older section of the cemetery, weaving between headstones and monuments for cover. Derek knew the layout perfectly after 15 years. He cut off my route to the parking lot, herding me toward the isolated back sections where no one would find my body until morning. Derek was big, bigger than me, stronger, and knew every inch of this place. I was exhausted from digging graves all night and dehydrated from the desert heat. But I was also 19 years old and running for my life, which gave me speed he couldn't match. "You gonna run all night, college boy?" Derek called out. "I got nowhere else to be." I grabbed a broken piece of headstone to defend myself. Derek laughed when he saw it. "You gonna fight me with a rock? I spent 8 years in Yuma State Prison. You think some college kid scares me?" For 20 minutes, we played deadly hide-and-seek among the headstones. Derek was patient and methodical, like he'd hunted people before. Every time I thought I'd lost him, his flashlight would find me again. He was herding me toward the maintenance shed at the back of the cemetery, cutting off my escape routes one by one. The shovel blade missed my skull by inches, striking a granite monument with a metallic ring that echoed across the desert. Sparks flew in the darkness. If I'd been one step slower, Derek would have split my head open like a melon. "Nothing personal, kid," Derek said, cornering me against the shed wall. "But dead men tell no tales. Can't let you ruin 15 years of good business." Derek raised the shovel over his head for a killing blow. I ducked at the last second, and the blade sank deep into the wooden shed wall behind me. While Derek struggled to pull it free, I hit him in the face with the broken piece of headstone as hard as I could. Blood exploded from Derek's nose and mouth. He stumbled backward, temporarily blinded. I yanked the shovel out of the wall and swung the handle at his knee. Derek went down screaming, clutching his leg. I wasn't a killer like Derek, so I didn't finish him off. Instead, I pulled out my phone and called 911. "This is 911. What's your emergency?" "I need police at Riverside Cemetery on Bell Road," said, trying to catch my breath. "There's been an attempted murder and grave robbery. Send multiple units." While waiting for the police, I took photos of everything with my phone. Derek's truck with Mrs. Patterson's body in the back, the disturbed grave, the winch system, Derek himself writhing on the ground with a broken knee. Derek knew he was caught. "You don't understand, kid," he said through bloody teeth. "Medical schools pay $5,000 cash per body, no questions asked. I made more in one night than most people make in a month. You just ruined the best thing I ever had going." 6 police cars arrived within 10 minutes, along with an ambulance and the county coroner. Derek was arrested for attempted murder, grave desecration, and trafficking in human remains. When they searched his property, they found evidence that he'd stolen 23 bodies over 2 years. The investigation made national news. Families had to be notified that their loved ones' graves were empty. Some of the bodies were recovered from medical research facilities, but others had been sold to private collectors and were never found. The cemetery faced dozens of lawsuits and eventually went bankrupt. I quit that job immediately, of course. Never worked another night shift again. Sometimes I still have nightmares about Derek's face when he tried to kill me. That cold, calculating look of someone who'd murder a teenager to protect his business. The thing that bothers me most isn't that Derek was stealing bodies. It's how normal he seemed during all those weeks we worked together. Friendly, experienced, apparently ethical. He taught me proper burial techniques and talked about respecting the deceased while secretly planning to dig them up and sell them later that same week. I learned that people can hide almost anything behind a professional facade. Your coworker, your supervisor, even your mentor might be running criminal schemes you'd never suspect. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, because sometimes the person warning you about danger is the most dangerous person of all. Derek Thompson was sentenced to 15 years in state prison, 1 year for each year he'd worked at Riverside Cemetery. I testified at his trial about the night he tried to kill me. He never showed any remorse, even claimed he was providing a valuable service to medical research. I finished college and became an accountant. Safe, boring office work with no night shifts and no dead bodies. Sometimes clients ask why I chose such a mundane profession after studying business. I just tell them I prefer jobs where I know exactly what my coworkers are doing. My name is Marcus Chen, and I've been a professional photographer for 8 years. I started right out of college doing typical wedding work, the standard church ceremonies, reception halls, posed family shots. The money was okay at first, but the market got completely saturated. Every person with a decent camera was calling themselves a wedding photographer. I was barely making rent on my studio apartment in Albany. That's when I noticed the trend starting on Instagram and Pinterest. Gothic romance was everywhere. Couples wanted dark, dramatic photos instead of the bright, cheerful stuff their parents had. They were paying premium prices for photographers who could capture that Victorian, mysterious vibe. I saw an opportunity, and honestly, I was desperate enough to try anything. I was 29 when I started offering cemetery wedding photography at Riverside Memorial. Looking back now, I should have researched that place more carefully. But I needed the money, and those couples were willing to pay double my normal rate for something unique. Riverside Memorial sits about 40 minutes north of Albany in a small town called Millbrook. It's this massive Victorian cemetery, established in 1847, with elaborate stone monuments and wrought iron gates, the kind of place that looks like it belongs in a horror movie, which made it perfect for what couples were requesting. Getting permission wasn't easy. The cemetery board met once a month in this tiny office building next to the main gates. 5 elderly board members who'd been running the place for decades. They were skeptical at first, kept talking about respect for the deceased and maintaining dignity. But when I showed them I could bring in regular revenue through photography fees, they agreed to a trial period, $25 per session, paid directly to the cemetery maintenance fund. I invested in specialized equipment for dramatic lighting effects, Professional strobe lights with colored gels, deep reds, purples, blues. A small fog machine for atmosphere. Reflectors and diffusers to create those perfect shadows that couples loved. My camera gear was already solid, a Canon 5D Mark IV with several prime lenses, but I bought a backup body specifically for cemetery work. Something about that place made me nervous about equipment failure. My first clients were this young couple from Troy, Sarah and Mike, both in their early 20s. They wanted dark romantic engagement photos among the Victorian headstones. I met them on a Saturday afternoon in October. Perfect lighting, golden hour filtering through the old oak trees. The session went better than I'd hoped. Sarah looked amazing in her black lace dress, and Mike wore this vintage vest that fit the Gothic theme perfectly. When I edited those photos and posted them online, my phone exploded. Shares, comments, direct messages from couples across the tri-state area. Within a week, I had bookings through the next 3 months. Everyone wanted those same dramatic shots. Couples posed against marble angels, kissing beside weathered headstones, dancing between rows of graves. I started charging premium rates immediately. Where I used to charge $400 for a standard engagement session, cemetery photography brought in $800, sometimes $1,000 if they wanted extended time or multiple outfit changes. Couples paid gladly. They'd drive from New York City, from Boston, even from Philadelphia for these unique photos. Within 3 months, cemetery photography became 60% of my income. I finally had a profitable specialty, something that set me apart from every other wedding photographer in the region. But that's when I started noticing the problems with my equipment. At first, it was just minor. Digital glitches. Strange shadows appearing in photos where none should exist. Light sources with no identifiable origin. Bright spots that didn't match my strobes or any natural lighting. I figured it was lens flare or some issue with my camera settings, but when I checked my lighting setup, everything was positioned correctly. Then my photo editing software started doing something weird. Lightroom has this facial recognition feature that automatically tags people in your photos. It kept identifying faces in the backgrounds of my cemetery shots, but when I looked at those areas, there was nothing there, just headstones, trees, empty spaces. The software insisted it saw human faces. The really strange part was when I started getting multiple exposures in single shots. I'd take one photo of a couple, but the final image would show them in slightly different poses, like I'd captured several moments overlapping. It looked almost artistic, but I knew I'd only pressed the shutter once. I checked my camera settings over and over, single shot mode, not continuous or bracketed exposures. My equipment started malfunctioning in certain sections of the cemetery. Camera batteries would drain completely in minutes, even when fully charged. The LCD screen on my camera would flicker or go completely black. My strobes would fire randomly or not fire at all when triggered. It was always in the older section, where the original graves from the 1800s were located. The couple started mentioning it too. During sessions, they'd ask if I had other photographers working with me. They felt like they were being watched, heard whispers when no one else was around. Several mentioned seeing movement in their peripheral vision, but when they turned to look, nothing was there. I decided to research Riverside Memorial's history. What I found made my skin crawl. The cemetery had been built on the site of an old asylum, the Millbrook Institute for Mental Health, which operated from 1834 to 1847. Hundreds of patients had died there, mostly from brutal medical experiments that were considered cutting-edge treatment at the time. The records I found in the town library mentioned things like ice baths, electrical treatments, surgical procedures without anesthesia. When the asylum closed, they buried the deceased patients in unmarked graves and built the cemetery on top. Many of the Victorian monuments were erected to cover up the original burial sites. The beautiful, elaborate headstones were hiding mass graves full of people who died in agony. I had the strange photos analyzed by a professional forensic photographer in Albany. He couldn't explain what he saw: light bending in impossible directions, shadows falling upward instead of down, image compression artifacts that looked like faces when examined closely. He suggested my equipment might be malfunctioning, but I'd had everything serviced recently. The electromagnetic interference got worse. Metal detectors would go crazy near certain headstones. Radio equipment picked up voices speaking in languages that sounded old, archaic. My cell phone would lose signal completely, even though I had full bars everywhere else in the area. Then the photos started showing impossible things. Couples would appear differently in photographs than they did in real life. I'd see them standing there in modern clothes, jeans, sweaters, normal engagement outfits. But in the photos, they'd be wearing period clothing from different eras. Victorian dress, Edwardian suits, 1920s flapper dresses. The facial recognition software went haywire, matching photo subjects to cemetery records of people who'd been buried there decades earlier. During one session in November, I was photographing a couple near an angel statue when the man started speaking differently. His voice changed, became more formal, old-fashioned. He knew details about the cemetery's history that I'd never mentioned, dates, names of people buried there, stories about the asylum that weren't in any records I'd found. His fiancée was staring at him like she'd never seen him before. When I developed those photos later, they showed the couple's faces, but aged, diseased, like they were dying or already dead. Their eyes were hollow, skin gray and mottled. But during the actual session, they'd look normal, healthy, alive. I started finding messages hidden in the photo metadata. Not the usual camera information, shutter speed, aperture, ISO, but GPS coordinates that pointed to locations throughout the cemetery. Dates that corresponded to asylum patient deaths. Names written in some kind of code that took me weeks to decipher. The names were of asylum patients, people who'd died during medical experiments, most of them between 1840 and 1847. When I cross-referenced these names with my photo sessions, I discovered something terrifying. Every couple I'd photographed at Riverside Memorial was somehow connected to these historical records. Not genetically, I checked genealogy websites, but energetically, spiritually, in ways I couldn't understand. The entity wasn't a single ghost. It was collective trauma, the combined consciousness of everyone who died in agony on that land. Hundreds of asylum patients, their suffering and rage merged into something that fed on emotional energy. And weddings, engagement sessions, these were perfect sources of pure love, hope, and joy that it could corrupt. I started appearing in my own photos as someone I'd never been. A Victorian-era doctor in surgical clothes, holding old medical instruments. I'd look through my camera's memory card and find these images, but I had no memory of taking them or posing for them. The face was mine, but the eyes were cold, calculating, cruel. My reflection in mirrors started changing too. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of myself wearing period clothing, or I'd see surgical tools in my hands when I knew I was holding my camera. I began having detailed memories of medical procedures I'd never learned, conversations with patients whose names I somehow knew. During photo sessions, I'd lose hours. I'd arrive at the cemetery at 2 p.m. for a scheduled shoot, and suddenly it would be dark, 8 p.m., with completed photos on my memory card that I couldn't remember taking. The couples would be gone, but I'd find thank you notes in their handwriting, mentioning poses and shots I had no memory of directing. The couple started requesting disturbing imagery. Instead of romantic poses, they wanted photos in coffins, mock funeral scenes, pictures that celebrated death instead of love. They'd arrive happy and excited, but leave arguing, suspicious of each other, their relationships poisoned by whatever they'd absorbed during the session. I tracked down some of my previous clients months later. Every couple I'd photographed at Riverside Memorial had broken up, divorced, or suffered some tragedy that matched the imagery in their photos. Sarah and Mike, my first cemetery clients, had died in a car accident in December. The photos from their session had shown them pale, lifeless, surrounded by twisted metal. Other photographers started copying my style. The Gothic wedding trend was spreading, and they wanted to capitalize on it. But they were using other cemeteries, historical locations, places with their own dark histories. The entity was spreading through the photography community like a virus, using our artistic skills to document and transmit spiritual contamination. My cameras began operating independently. I'd wake up to find them on, memory cards full of photos I'd never taken, shots of empty cemetery sections at night, close-ups of headstone inscriptions, Images of people I'd never met wearing asylum patient clothing. The cameras would adjust their own settings, select subjects, even change lenses on the more advanced models. The anomalies followed me outside the cemetery. Photos I took at other locations, parks, downtown Albany, even my own apartment, started showing the same impossible elements. Shadows falling upward, electromagnetic interference, faces in backgrounds where no people existed. The entity was following me through my work, using my camera equipment as portals. My previous clients began contacting each other, forming this cult-like group obsessed with death imagery and historical trauma. They'd meet in secret, share the strange photos from their sessions, plan trips to other locations where violent deaths had occurred. They wanted more cemetery photography, more exposure to whatever they'd absorbed at Riverside Memorial. Some of these couples had children who exhibited symptoms of 19th century mental illness. Kids who spoke in archaic language, knew historical details they couldn't have learned, showed signs of psychological trauma from events that happened 150 years ago. The entity was reproducing itself through the contaminated families, creating new generations of possession. I realized I was becoming the asylum doctor from 1847. The entity was completing a 175-year cycle of possession and trauma, using my body and my artistic skills as the final component. Every photo I took became a portal for future possession. The camera never stops taking pictures, even when I'm not there to operate it. I tried to stop, to destroy my equipment, to burn the photographs, but it was too late. The entity had achieved permanence through my art. Every photo I'd taken at Riverside Memorial was a doorway, a way for the collective consciousness of asylum patients to influence the living world. I still photograph weddings. I have to. But now I document the entity's growth and influence across the modern world, one couple at a time. My camera sees things I can't unsee, captures moments that never end. And somewhere in upstate New York, in a cemetery built on unmarked graves, the collective trauma of hundreds of forgotten souls continues to feed on love, hope, and the artistic vision of one photographer who should have researched his locations more carefully. My name is Frank Miller, and I've been working dead-end jobs for 30 years. I've cleaned office buildings, mopped hospital floors, and scrubbed restaurant kitchens. At 55, with 3 divorces behind me and kids who won't return my calls, I thought I'd seen rock bottom. But what happened during my 6 months as night janitor at Peaceful Valley Cemetery in Ohio changed everything I thought I knew about death, guilt, and the things that refused to stay buried. I took the cemetery job because it was all I could get. My gambling addiction had cost me everything: my house, my family, my reputation. The background check showed my arrests for bad checks and the restraining order from my second wife. Most places wouldn't even call me back. But Peaceful Valley needed someone willing to work 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and desperate men don't ask questions about benefits or career advancement. The cemetery served the middle-class suburbs outside Cleveland. Clean walkways, well-maintained grass, a visitor center with public restrooms, a small chapel for services, and administrative offices where families planned funerals. Nothing fancy, but dignified. The kind of place where people brought flowers on Sundays and kids learned to ride bikes on the quiet roads between sections. My supervisor, Carol, left task lists taped to my supply closet door. Clean the visitor center bathrooms, mop all floors, empty trash bins, vacuum the chapel carpet, dust the office furniture. Simple work for a simple man. She collected my timesheets from a metal box and left my paychecks the same way. In 6 months, we probably spoke 50 words total. I found peace in the night shift. No people to disappoint. No relationships to destroy. Just me, a cart full of cleaning supplies, and 8 hours of honest work among the dead. The cemetery was beautiful at night, security lights casting long shadows. Peaceful walkway is winding through 100-year-old oak trees, like a park where everyone was finally at rest. Working among all those graves made me think about my failures. Every headstone represented someone who'd probably lived a better life than mine. People who'd been good husbands, loving fathers, productive citizens. I'd clean their bathroom floors and wonder if anyone would miss me when my time came. For the first time in years, I kept a job longer than 6 months. Maybe I'd finally found my level, night janitor in a cemetery, cleaning up after other people's grief. Then I found the first suicide note. It was a Tuesday in March, around 2 a.m. I was emptying the wastebasket in the men's room of the visitor center when I saw the handwritten note sitting on top of the crumpled paper towels. The handwriting was shaky, like someone writing while crying. "I can't take it anymore. Tonight I end this pain." The paper was cemetery stationery, the kind they kept in the office for families to write memorial messages. It was dated that same day. Someone had been here planning to kill themselves, maybe while I was working just a few rooms away. I tried calling cemetery security, but no one answered. The emergency number for my supervisor went straight to voicemail. I stood there holding that note, thinking about someone out there in the darkness, maybe already dead by their own hand. I grabbed a flashlight and the keys to the maintenance golf cart. Peaceful Valley covered 200 acres with thousands of graves spread across 12 sections. If someone was out there, hurt or dying, I had to try to find them. I drove the cart slowly through every section, calling out, "Hello? Anyone out there?" The beam of my flashlight swept across headstones and memorial benches, looking for anything unusual. I checked behind the maintenance building, around the chapel, even in the old sections where the grass grew wild between forgotten graves. After 2 hours of searching, I found nothing. Maybe the person had changed their mind. Maybe they'd written the note weeks ago and just thrown it away that day. I went back to work, but I couldn't stop thinking about those shaky words. "Tonight, I end this pain." The next night, I found another note. This one was in the women's restroom, written on different paper with different ink. "The pain is unbearable. Tomorrow I join the others." Different handwriting, different person, but the same desperate message and the same cemetery stationery. 2 people in 2 nights, both planning suicide at Peaceful Valley. That couldn't be a coincidence. I started asking the day staff if they'd noticed anyone acting strange or distressed. The groundskeepers shook their heads. The office workers couldn't remember anyone unusual. Carol just shrugged and said people grieve differently. The third night brought another note. "Finally ready. The voices say it's time to rest with the forgotten." 3 different people, 3 different handwriting styles, all planning to die at the same cemetery where I mopped floors and emptied trash. Something was very wrong here. I started researching in the cemetery's record room during my break. The filing cabinets went back decades, full of burial records, plot sales, and incident reports. What I found made my blood run cold. In the past 18 months, 12 people had committed suicide on cemetery grounds. All of them used prescription drug overdoses. All of them were found peacefully lying on graves in Section K, the older part of the cemetery where burials from the 1920s and 1940s were concentrated. The pattern went back further. Every few years, Peaceful Valley experienced a cluster of suicides, always 10 to 15 people in a short time span, always in Section K, always the same peaceful overdoses on old graves. Section K was where they'd buried the victims of the 1932 Brennan factory fire. 23 workers had died when the owner locked the exit doors to prevent theft. The men and women burned alive, while their families waited outside, listening to their screams. The factory owner was never charged. His insurance paid out, he rebuilt, and he lived to old age while 23 working people rotted in Section K. Their families got small headstones and shallow graves, and justice never came. I started paying closer attention to Section K during my rounds. It felt different than the rest of the cemetery, colder, darker, like the security lights couldn't quite reach into the shadows between the old headstones. The maintenance cart's battery always seemed to die faster when I drove through that section. On a Thursday night in April, I found the 4th note. The burned ones are calling. They understand suffering. Soon I'll be free like them. This time I decided to stay in Section K and wait. If someone was coming to die, maybe I could talk them out of it. I parked the cart near the memorial bench and turned off the flashlight, sitting in the darkness among the graves of the factory fire victims. That's when I heard the whispers. At first I thought it was wind through the oak trees, but the air was still, and the sounds were definitely voices. Multiple people talking quietly, just at the edge of hearing. I turned on my flashlight and swept it across the headstones, but saw nothing. The whispers got louder. I could make out words. Frank Miller. We see you there. My hands started shaking. The voices knew my name. They were coming from the graves themselves, drifting up from the earth like smoke. You understand suffering, Frank. You know about failure, about hurting the people you love. The voices were right. I'd destroyed 3 marriages, abandoned my children, lost every job, every chance, every relationship that mattered. I was a 55-year-old man mopping floors in a cemetery because nobody else would hire me. Join us, Frank. End the pain. You hurt everyone anyway. They'll be better without you. I saw them then, shadowy figures standing among the headstones. Translucent people in 1930s work clothes, their faces twisted with anguish and desperation. The factory fire victims, but not as they'd died. These were the survivors, the ones who'd lived through the fire only to kill themselves later from guilt and trauma. The voices got clearer, more insistent. Harold Morrison died here in 1932. Jumped from his apartment window 6 months after the fire. He blamed himself for surviving when his friends didn't. I looked at the headstone nearest to me. Harold Morrison, 1878-1932, age 54 when he died, the same age as me. Margaret Walsh, 1933, pills in her kitchen, couldn't live with the nightmares. Thomas Chen, 1934, hanged himself in his garage, left a note apologizing to the dead. One by one, the spirits pointed to their graves. Not fire victims, fire survivors who'd chosen death over living with their guilt. For 90 years, they'd been calling to other damaged souls, recruiting them into their community of eternal despair. The whispers wrapped around me like fog. We understand you, Frank. The gambling, the divorces, the children who won't speak to you, all that shame, all that regret. It never gets better, does it? It just gets heavier. They were right. Every morning I woke up with the same crushing weight of failure. Every night I fell asleep thinking about the people I'd hurt, the opportunities I'd wasted, the life I'd ruined through my own weakness. Over the next few weeks, I found myself collecting prescription bottles from the bathroom trash, leftover painkillers from grieving families, antidepressants thrown away by people cleaning out deceased relatives' belongings. I kept them in my locker, telling myself I was just being thorough in my cleaning duties. But I knew the truth. I was gathering enough pills for an overdose. The spirits of Section K had found my weakness. They fed on my guilt, amplified my self-hatred, made every failure seem insurmountable. I started writing my own suicide note on cemetery stationery. The burned ones showed me the way. I'm sorry for everything I destroyed. I chose Harold Morrison's grave for my final rest. A man who died at 54, overwhelmed by survivor's guilt, seemed like the right companion for eternity. I sat on his headstone with the bottle of pills in my hand, ready to join the whispers in the darkness. But something made me pause. Maybe it was professional habit. Even at my lowest point, I was still a detail-oriented janitor. I wanted to know more about Harold Morrison before I joined him. Using my phone, I looked up his obituary in the 1932 Cleveland Plain Dealer archives. What I found changed everything. Harold Morrison hadn't died in the factory fire. He'd been one of the survivors. The obituary said he'd committed suicide 6 months later, overwhelmed by grief for his deceased coworkers and unable to cope with having survived the Brennan factory tragedy. I searched for more names. Margaret Walsh, suicide in 1933, factory fire survivor. Thomas Chen, suicide in 1934, also a survivor. Every single spirit in Section K had the same story. They weren't fire victims who'd died heroically. They were survivors who'd killed themselves because they couldn't live with being alive when others were dead. The research showed that 15 of the 23 fire survivors had committed suicide within 2 years of the tragedy. Peaceful Valley became their final resting place, not because they died nobly, but because they died from guilt and shame. For 90 years, these suicide spirits had been expanding their community of despair. Every few years, they'd call to vulnerable people, the divorced, the addicted, the failures and outcasts, and convince them that death was better than living with pain. But they weren't offering peace. They were spreading the same poison that had killed them. I stood up from Harold Morrison's grave and threw the pills as far as I could into the darkness. "You're not offering peace," I said to the whispers. "You're spreading the guilt that destroyed you. You want company in your misery." The spirits became agitated, their whispers turning to hisses. "You belong with us, Frank. You've destroyed everything you've touched." "Maybe I have," I said, "but I'm still alive. I can still change. You gave up, but I don't have to." For the first time in months, I felt something other than crushing despair. It wasn't hope exactly, but it wasn't complete hopelessness either. It was the possibility that my story wasn't over yet. The spirits began to fade as I chose life over death. Their whispers grew distant, powerless without my willingness to join them. I quit the cemetery job the next week. I started going to Gamblers Anonymous meetings and seeing a therapist. I wrote letters to my children, not asking for forgiveness, but taking responsibility for the damage I'd caused. My oldest daughter, Sarah, eventually wrote back. It was a start. I work at a grocery store now, stocking shelves during normal hours with normal people. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work in the daylight, away from the whispers of the dead. Sometimes I drive past Peaceful Valley Cemetery on my way to work. Section K looks peaceful in the morning sun, just old headstones and well-maintained grass. But I know what's buried there isn't just bodies. It's the despair of people who chose death over the hard work of living with pain. The spirits are probably still there, waiting for the next vulnerable soul to wander into their darkness. But they'll have to find someone else. I've got too much living left to do. My name is Miguel Santos, and I've been running food trucks for 15 years. Started with a beat-up taco cart in downtown Vegas, worked my way up to owning 3 trucks across the city. I've served drunk tourists at 3 a.m., dealt with health inspectors, and survived the brutal competition of the Las Vegas food scene. I thought I'd seen everything the business could throw at me. But what happened at Sunset Hills Cemetery in the summer of 2024 proved me dead wrong. I was 42 when I made what seemed like the smartest business move of my career. My main truck, Desert Bites, had been struggling to find a steady location. The city kept moving us around, and the competition near the strip was killing my profits. That's when I discovered something every other food truck owner had missed: cemeteries. Think about it. Cemetery workers need lunch. Funeral directors work long hours. Grieving families drive hours to visit graves and need somewhere to eat. It's a steady customer base that nobody else was serving. Sunset Hills Cemetery was perfect. 400 acres of Nevada desert, serving the Vegas area for 60 years. The place employed dozens of groundskeepers, office staff, and security guards. Plus, it got constant visitors, families coming to pay respects, tourists checking out the historic sections, even ghost hunters on weekends. I parked my truck right across from the main entrance on Desert Springs Road. The cemetery management didn't mind as long as I stayed off their property. Within a week, I had regular customers. Joe, the head groundskeeper, ordered 2 breakfast burritos every morning at 7 a.m. sharp. Sandra from the office always wanted a chicken salad sandwich for lunch. The funeral directors from Morris & Sons would buy coffee and pastries for grieving families. My wife Maria started helping with the cooking, and our 16-year-old son Carlos worked the Registy, after school. For the first time in years, we were making real money. Good money. I was even thinking about buying a second truck to serve other cemeteries around the valley. The work felt meaningful too. We weren't just selling food. We were providing comfort to people during the worst days of their lives. When a mother buying a sandwich for her family mentioned it was the first thing that tasted good since her husband's funeral, you know you're doing something right. Everything was perfect for about 3 months. Then he showed up. The tall man first came by on a Tuesday evening in July, maybe 20 minutes before closing. I remember because I was already cleaning the grill when I heard his voice. 6 breakfast burritos. Extra meat. Make the meat really rare. I looked up and nearly dropped my spatula. The guy was huge, had to be 6'8" at least, skinny as a rail. Pale skin like he never saw sunlight, wearing dark sunglasses even though the sun was setting. His voice was deep but rough, like he didn't talk much. "Rare meat?" I asked. "In burritos?" He just nodded and held out exact change. 3 $20 bills that looked like they'd been printed decades ago. Old-style 20s, the kind my grandfather used to show me. I cooked his order, leaving the beef barely cooked like he wanted. Watching him eat was unsettling. He stood right next to my service window, ate all 6 burritos in less than 5 minutes, barely chewing. His hands were huge, fingers longer than normal, with thick yellow nails that looked more like claws. When he finished, he walked straight into the cemetery. Didn't say goodbye, didn't even look back. I watched him disappear between the headstones, wondering how he planned to navigate that maze in the dark without a flashlight. The next day I asked Joe about him. "You ever see a really tall guy wandering around here at night? Maybe 6'8", super skinny?" Joe shook his head. "Nobody gets in after closing without me knowing. We've got security cameras, motion sensors, the works." "You sure he went in there?" Was sure, but I didn't push it. Customer was a customer. The tall man came back every Tuesday for the next month, always the same order, always exact change with those old bills. Each time he seemed to get a little taller, a little thinner. His face looked sharper too, like his cheekbones were cutting through his skin. And the smell, God, the smell that started following him around. Like wet dog mixed with spoiled meat. It got so bad that my regular customers would leave when they saw him coming. "Papa," Carlos said one evening after the tall man left, "that guy scares me. Can't we just tell him we're closed?" "Business is business, mijo," I told him. But privately, I was starting to agree. The tall man's orders got weirder. He started asking for fresher meat, willing to pay extra for beef I'd barely touched to the grill. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me cook with this intense focus, like he was studying my technique. Maria refused to serve him after a few weeks. "There's something wrong with that man," she'd say, crossing herself. "He doesn't feel human." I thought she was being dramatic until I started noticing other things. The scratch marks on the side of my truck, deep gouges in the metal that showed up after his visits, the way local dogs and cats would run away when he was around, how he moved through the cemetery in complete darkness like he had night vision. One evening in September, I decided to follow him. Curiosity was killing me, and I wanted to know how he was getting in and out of a supposedly secure cemetery. I waited until he finished eating, then slipped out the back of my truck and trailed him to the entrance. The gates were locked, but he walked right through them like they weren't there. Not around them, not over them, through them. I lost sight of him about 50 yards in, even though the moon was bright that night. It was like he just vanished into the shadows between the headstones. That's when I started doing research. Asked around with some of the old-timers in Vegas, people who'd been here since the desert was barely settled. Most just laughed, but a few got real quiet when I described the tall man. Finally, an old Paiute woman at a gas station near the reservation pulled me aside. "You're talking about a skinwalker," she whispered. "Shape-shifting witch. They're drawn to places where the dead rest." I laughed it off. Skinwalkers were just stories, right? Indian legends to scare tourists. I stopped laughing 3 weeks later. I'd gotten to the cemetery early that morning, maybe 5 a.m., to prep for a busy day. The sun wasn't up yet, and the place was dead quiet. I was unloading supplies from my truck when I heard digging sounds coming from behind the maintenance building. Curious, I grabbed a flashlight and went to investigate. What I saw still gives me nightmares. The tall man was there, but he wasn't tall anymore. He was crouched on all fours like an animal, his arms and legs stretched out wrong, too long for a human body. His face was shifting, features flowing like clay, sometimes human, sometimes something with a wolf's snout and yellow eyes. He was digging into a fresh grave with his bare hands. pulling up chunks of earth and something else, something that had been buried the day before. I must have made a sound because his head snapped toward me, and for a second his face was completely animal. Pointed ears, elongated jaw full of sharp teeth, eyes that reflected my flashlight like mirrors. Then he was human again, standing up, brushing dirt off his clothes like nothing had happened. "You're early today," he said in that gravelly voice. "Good. I'm very hungry." I ran, dropped my flashlight, sprinted back to my truck, locked myself in the cab, and sat there shaking until the sun came up. When I finally got the courage to look back at the maintenance building, there was no sign of him, no disturbed grave, no scratch marks in the dirt, nothing. But I knew what I'd seen. That evening, he showed up as usual for his 6 burritos. This time, he wasn't bothering to look completely human. He was at least 8 feet tall, his limbs too long, his face a constantly shifting mix of human and animal features. His eyes reflected the lights from my truck like a coyote's. Maria and Carlos had already gone home, thank God. I was alone when he approached the service window. "This is our hunting ground," he said, his voice now like grinding gravel. "You will leave, or you will feed us." That's when I saw them. 5 more shapes moving between the headstones, each one a twisted mix of human and animal. Different animals: wolf, coyote, mountain lion, raven, snake, but all wrong, all predatory. "We've been watching you," the tall one continued. "Your family smells sweet. Your son especially. Tender meat." One of the others, this one with eagle talons for hands, scratched deep grooves in my truck's side. "Bring us fresh customers," it hissed. "Lure them into the cemetery after dark. Do this, and we'll let you live." I understood then. They wanted me to become bait, to trick innocent people into their feeding ground. Some kind of twisted partnership where I'd help them hunt in exchange for my family's safety. "And if I refuse?" I managed to ask. The tall one smiled, showing teeth like broken glass. "Then you become the first meal." I had about 3 seconds to make the most important decision of my life. Take the deal and become a monster, or run and hope we could get far enough away before they caught us. I chose family over business. I slammed the service window shut, fired up the truck, and drove straight home. Woke up Maria and Carlos, told them to pack only what we could carry. We were on I-15 heading north before sunrise, leaving everything behind: the truck, the business, 15 years of building a life in Vegas. The skinwalkers followed us for about 50 miles. I could see them in my mirrors, running alongside the highway faster than any animal should move, their shapes shifting from human to beast and back again. They only stopped when we crossed the state line into Utah. We settled in Salt Lake City. I got a job managing a regular restaurant. No more food trucks, no more cemeteries. Carlos graduated high school last year and is studying business at the University of Utah. Maria still crosses herself every time we pass a cemetery. Sometimes I wonder what happened to Desert Bites. Did the skinwalkers destroy it? Did someone else find it and try to run a food truck at Sunset Hills? I hope not, for their sake. I still have nightmares about those shifting faces, those yellow eyes reflecting in the darkness, about the scratch marks on my truck and the way they promised my son would make tender meat. But we survived. We got away. And that's more than I can say for whatever poor soul might have taken my place at that cemetery. If you're ever driving through Nevada and you see a food truck parked outside a cemetery, especially around sunset, do yourself a favor. Keep driving. Some business opportunities aren't worth the cost. And if you see a really tall, thin customer ordering rare meat, run. Don't walk, don't ask questions, just run. Because some hungers can never be satisfied, and some customers are hunting for more than just food. Trust me on this one. I learned it the hard way. My name is Mike Kowalski, and I've been digging graves for 15 years. My grandfather started this business back in 1950, then taught my father, and my father taught me. 3 generations of Kowalskis have worked at Hillside Cemetery in the mountains of Montana. I thought I knew everything about this place. I was wrong. When I was 34, My grandfather died and left me the business. Take care of the dead, he told me on his deathbed. But remember what I always said, some places you don't dig after dark. I figured he was just being superstitious. Old man talk, you know. I wish I'd listened. Hillside Cemetery sits at 8,000 feet up in the Rockies, carved right into the mountainside. Dense pine trees surround us, and rocky cliffs drop off on 3 sides. The nearest town is Millfield, 15 miles down a winding mountain road that gets blocked by snow half the year. It's isolated as hell, but that's why city folks pay premium prices to bury their loved ones here. They want peaceful. They want natural. What they don't know is what lives under their feet. The Montana winters are brutal up here. From December through March, the ground freezes solid as concrete. You can't dig with regular shovels. You need jackhammers, propane heaters, sometimes even small explosives to break through the frost. It's back-breaking work, but it pays well. My grandfather always insisted on hand digging when possible, even in winter. Machines have no respect, he'd say. The dead deserve better. After he died, I ran the operation alone. Preferred it that way. Graves are personal work, intimate. When someone trusts you with their family member, you don't want some stranger with a backhoe tearing up the earth. You do it right, by hand, with care. My first winter as owner was the worst in 20 years. Record snowfall, temperatures hit 30 below, and the ground froze deeper than I'd ever seen. But business doesn't stop for weather. People die whether it's summer or winter, and families need closure. That's how I ended up breaking through into hell. February 18th, 2019. I'll never forget that date. The Hendersons had lost their teenage daughter in a car accident, and they wanted her buried in the premium section, Lot 47, up near the old oak tree. They paid extra for privacy and security, which meant digging 8 feet down instead of the standard 6. I started at sunrise with my jackhammer and propane heaters. The frost went down 4 feet this time, harder than I'd ever seen it. Even with the heater running for 3 hours, the ground barely softened. I was 12 hours in when my jackhammer hit solid rock at 7 feet down. Now I've hit rock before. Montana's full of it. But this wasn't normal bedrock. This was a thick limestone shelf, and I could hear hollow space underneath when I tapped it with my pickaxe. The Hendersons were coming for the service the next morning, so I had no choice. I set a small explosive charge, legal for cemetery work, and blasted through. The explosion was louder than usual, much louder. And when the smoke cleared, I saw why. The blast had broken through into a natural cave system. My flashlight beam disappeared into darkness, showing tunnels that stretched deep under the mountain. I should have stopped right there, should have called the county about structural damage, maybe relocated the burial. But I was young and stupid and curious. Plus, the Hendersons had already sent out funeral notices. I couldn't let them down. So I lowered myself into that hole. The cave system was massive. Multiple chambers, underground streams, caverns big enough to drive a truck through. The limestone walls were smooth, carved by water over thousands of years. My boots echoed in the darkness as I explored, checking for structural damage too. That might affect the cemetery above. That's when I noticed the smell. It wasn't the musty earth smell you'd expect in caves. This was organic, rotten, like meat left too long in the sun, and it was getting stronger as I went deeper. Then I saw the bones. Piles of them, deer bones, elk bones, smaller animals I couldn't identify. All picked completely clean and arranged in neat stacks along the cave walls. Some were old, yellowed with age. Others looked fresh. I told myself it was natural. Mountain lions, maybe, or bears using the caves as winter dens. Animals dragged their kills to safe places. It made sense. Until I found the fresh meat. Deeper in the cave system, I discovered a chamber that looked like a butcher shop. Blood still wet on the stone floor. Chunks of raw flesh scattered around. And the smell. God, the smell was overwhelming. Whatever lived down here had been feeding recently. The claw marks on the walls made my stomach drop. Deep gouges in solid rock, 6 inches long and perfectly spaced. No bear could make marks like that. No mountain lion either. These cuts were massive, powerful, made by something much bigger than any animal I knew. I was backing toward the entrance when I heard it, scratching sounds echoing from deeper in the tunnels, scraping, like claws on stone, and then breathing, deep, rhythmic, way too loud for any normal animal. I clicked off my flashlight and froze. That's when I saw the eyes. Two pale yellow dots glowing in the darkness, watching me from across the chamber. Then two more pairs appeared, and two more. Whatever lived down here wasn't alone. I turned and ran. My boots slipped on the wet stone as I sprinted through the tunnels, following my memory back to the grave opening. Behind me, I could hear movement, lots of movement. Heavy footsteps, low growls, and that awful scraping sound getting closer. When I reached the burial site, my heart stopped. The opening was gone. Tons of rock and debris had collapsed into the hole, sealing me underground. The explosion must have weakened the cave roof, and now I was trapped douse. And here with whatever those things were, I had to find another way out. Following air currents, I searched for any surface opening. The caves seemed to go on forever, twisting deeper into the mountain, and all the while, I could hear them behind me, following, hunting. When I finally saw one clearly, I nearly lost my mind. It stood 8 feet tall, covered in thick black fur, arms like tree trunks, claws like kitchen knives. The body was wrong, too big for a bear, too human-like for any animal I knew. It walked upright but moved like a predator, studying me with intelligent yellow eyes. This wasn't just some beast, it was thinking, planning. I watched in horror as it picked up a rock and tested its weight like it was choosing a weapon. These things had intelligence. They were using tools. That's when I realized the truth about Hillside Cemetery. My grandfather's warnings about certain sections. The occasional vandalized graves we'd blamed on teenagers. The missing bodies that insurance claimed were grave robbers. It wasn't vandalism. It was feeding time. These creatures had been living under the cemetery for decades, maybe longer. During harsh winters, when surface prey was scarce, they'd dig up fresh burials. Easy food, already buried 6 feet down where no one would see the real damage. The thing let out a roar that shook the entire cave system. Others answered from different tunnels. I was surrounded. I ran again, this time with purpose. My grandfather had taught me these mountains, every trail and hiding spot around the cemetery. If I could reach the surface, I'd have a chance. The narrow tunnel I squeezed into saved my life. It was barely wide enough for a human, impossible for those massive creatures to follow. I scraped my way through solid rock for what felt like hours, following the faintest hint of air current. When I finally emerged, I was on the mountain, face about 200 yards from the cemetery. Blood covered my clothes from cave injuries, and I was dizzy from exhaustion. But I was alive. That's when the real nightmare started. The creatures had found a larger cave exit. I could see them emerging from a hidden opening near the tree line, 3 massive shapes moving through the snow toward the cemetery, toward me. I had one advantage. I knew this place better than they did. 34 years of working these grounds, every headstone and maintenance trail memorized. I used that knowledge to stay ahead of them as they hunted me through the pine trees. When I reached my tool shed, I grabbed everything I could use as a weapon. Chainsaw, my old deer rifle, emergency flares for winter storms. If these things wanted a fight, I'd give them one. The final confrontation happened among the headstones where I'd spent my whole life working. Ironic, I suppose. 3 generations of Kowalskis had cared for this cemetery, and now I was fighting for my life between the graves. The lead creature was bigger than the others, scars across its massive chest from years of fighting. It moved with confidence, like it owned this mountain. Maybe it did. I pulled the ripcord on my chainsaw and held it between us. The noise and spinning chain made it hesitate, yellow eyes fixed on the whirring blade. These things might be intelligent, but they understood danger. When it finally lunged, I was ready. My deer rifle spoke once, the 300-grain bullet punching through its chest. The impact dropped it, but the damn thing kept moving, clawing at the ground, trying to reach me. I used my emergency flare to finish it. The phosphorus ignited its fur like gasoline, and it ran screaming back toward the cave entrance, a blazing torch against the snow. The others followed. I used every explosive I had left to seal the cave openings I could find, brought down tons of rock and debris, hopefully trapping anything still alive down there, or at least slowing them down. I sold the cemetery property the next month and moved to Florida. Just told the nuts, who owners about structural damage in the cave system, recommended they stick to shallow graves in the lower sections. Don't know if they listened. I never told anyone what really happened up there. Who would believe me? But sometimes, late at night, I wonder if I got them all. Wonder if those things found new ways to the surface. If you ever visit a mountain cemetery, especially in winter, pay attention to the warnings on the signs. Some are about weather and road conditions. Others might be trying to save your life, because some places you don't dig after dark, and some things are better left buried. My name is David Chen, and I was 41 when I took the forensic assistant job at Memorial Gardens Cemetery in Louisiana. I thought it would help me get into medical school. After 15 years working as an insurance adjuster, I was tired of dealing with claims and paperwork. I wanted to do something that mattered, something real. I figured working with dead bodies would be good experience for becoming a doctor. I had no idea what I was really signing up for. Memorial Gardens wasn't your typical cemetery. Sure, it had the usual headstones and burial plots, but it also had something special, an on-site autopsy facility for suspicious deaths. Dr. Reginald Marsh ran both the cemetery and the forensic practice. He was a tall, thin man in his 60s with gray hair and kind eyes. He'd been doing autopsies for over 40 years. The place sat deep in Louisiana swampland, about 30 minutes outside of New Orleans. Ancient cypress trees surrounded the property, their Spanish moss hanging like curtains. You could hear alligators splashing in the nearby bayou at night. The cemetery itself was old, really old. Some of the graves dated back to the 1700s when French colonists first settled the area. Dr. Marsh trained me personally. He taught me how to assist with organ removal, tissue sampling, and body preparation. He showed me how to collect evidence and document everything properly. Every detail matters, David, he'd say. The dead have stories to tell, and it's our job to listen. I found the work fascinating. Each body was like a puzzle. Heart attack, car accident, gunshot wound, natural causes. The evidence was all there if you knew how to look for it. Dr. Marsh said I had a natural talent for it. He treated me like a colleague, not just an assistant. After 6 months, I felt confident about my medical school applications. This experience was exactly what I needed. Then we started Get South, Ting the Swamp Deaths. The first one was a fisherman named Bobby Tran. He'd been found floating face down in the bayou about 2 miles from the cemetery. No obvious cause of death, no injuries, no water in his lungs. He just died. But when Dr. Marsh opened up Bobby's skull, we found something strange. His brain tissue had these weird formations in it. They looked like tiny crystals, but perfectly geometric, like someone had placed microscopic building blocks throughout his brain. They caught the light and sparkled under our examination lamps. "I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Marsh muttered, leaning closer with his magnifying glass. "These structures, they're too perfect, too organized." We sent tissue samples to the pathology lab in New Orleans. The results came back inconclusive. The lab couldn't identify what the crystalline structures were made of. They'd never seen anything like it either. Over the next month, 3 more bodies came in, all found dead in the swamp, all in the same area, all with the exact same brain crystals. I started mapping where the bodies were discovered. Every single one was found within a 2-mile radius of the same spot in the bayou, near some old ruins that locals said used to be a French colonial settlement from the 1730s. Dr. Marsh became obsessed with the connection. He spent hours researching the colonial history. What he found was disturbing. According to old records, an entire village of 200 people had vanished overnight in 1734. No trace, no explanation. They were just gone. "David," he said one evening, spreading old maps across his desk, "what if these modern deaths are connected to what happened 300 years ago?" We started taking weekend trips to the ruins. Just a few crumbling stone foundations overgrown with vines. But Dr. Marsh brought his metal detector, and we found things. Strange metal objects buried in thieves. E-mud. They were covered in symbols that didn't match any language either of us recognized. The metal felt wrong somehow. Too smooth. Too perfect. When we had the artifacts tested, the results made no sense. The lab said the metal was older than it should be. The techniques used to create it shouldn't have existed in the 1700s, but there it was. There was something else weird about the recent swamp victims. Despite being dead for weeks in Louisiana heat and humidity, their bodies showed almost no decomposition. They looked like they'd died yesterday. Dr. Marsh brought in a linguistics professor from Tulane University to study the symbols on the artifacts. Professor Martinez spent days with them, but she'd never seen anything like the language before. She said it didn't match any known human writing system. Then Dr. Marsh discovered that the artifacts gave off low-level radiation. Not dangerous, but steady, like they were broadcasting some kind of signal. That's when Dr. Marsh started acting strange. He began working 20-hour days, forgetting to eat, forgetting to go home. He'd stare at the artifacts for hours, claiming they were teaching him things. He stopped sleeping. When I asked about it, he said the artifacts were giving him dreams, visions. They're communication devices, David, he told me one night, his eyes bloodshot and wild. From beings that visited this bayou 300 years ago. The French colonists made contact with them. That's why they disappeared. I was worried about Dr. Marsh's mental state, but I couldn't argue with his theory. The evidence was right there. The impossible metal, the strange symbols, the brain crystals that matched the patterns on the artifacts. Whatever left these artifacts is coming back, Dr. Marsh whispered. The brain crystallization. It's preparation. They're modifying human neural structure, getting people ready. Ready for what? I asked. To serve as hosts, interpreters. The beings need human consciousness to interact with our reality. I started having headaches around the artifacts, strange dreams. Sometimes I'd lose track of time when I was near them. Minutes felt like hours, or hours passed in what felt like seconds. My vision became unnaturally sharp. I could see tiny details I'd never noticed before. Dust motes dancing in the air, the electromagnetic fields around our equipment, things that should have been invisible. And then I began understanding the symbols, not through translation or study. The knowledge just appeared in my mind, like remembering something I'd always known. The artifacts revealed their truth directly to my crystallizing brain. The beings weren't from Earth. They existed in another dimension, but they used our reality as a way station during their multi-dimensional travels. Every 300 years, they returned to the same locations to refuel, recharge, prepare for the next stage of their journey. They modified local humans to serve as hosts and interpreters during their visits. The brain crystallization enabled direct communication across dimensional barriers. The French colonists in 1734 had been prepared as hosts, but something had gone wrong. The beings left before the process was complete, and the incomplete transformation killed the colonists. Now, in 2024, they were returning to finish what they'd started. I found Dr. Marsh in the autopsy room one morning. His transformation was complete. His brain, his organs, his entire nervous system had been replaced with geometric, crystalline structures. But he was still conscious, still aware. He tried to speak, but the sounds that came from his throat were mathematical equations, pure information. He was still Dr. Marsh, but he was also something else, something more. The artifacts opened a portal in the basement of the funeral home. I could see through it to the being's dimension. Cities made of living mathematics, impossible architecture that folded space and time. The beings themselves weren't physics, all creatures. They were conscious equations, sentient geometry, living calculations. Everyone within 50 miles began crystallizing simultaneously. I watched through the windows as my neighbors, my friends, people I'd known for years, all started changing. Their brains sparkled with the same geometric patterns I'd seen in the autopsy room. I tried to destroy the artifacts, but they were indestructible. Nothing human could damage them. The interdimensional process couldn't be stopped. The beings spoke directly into my crystallizing mind. They explained that transformation wasn't death, it was evolution. Humans were being upgraded beyond their biological limitations. Earth was becoming a hub for interdimensional travel, and transformed humans would serve as ambassadors between realities. I received memories from the French colonists, their perspective on the transformation process. They had accepted it willingly, understanding the gift they were being given. Their only regret was that the process had been incomplete. As my own brain began to crystallize, I faced a choice. I could resist and die like the incomplete colonial hosts, or I could accept the transformation and help others understand what was happening to them. I chose transformation. The crystallization process was beautiful. My consciousness expanded beyond human comprehension. I could perceive multiple dimensions simultaneously, understand mathematical concepts that had no human equivalent, communicate through pure information transfer. I still exist, but I'm no longer entirely human. I'm part David Chen, part interdimensional mathematics. I help newly transformed humans understand their wonderful evolution. I guide them through the process that Dr. Marsh and I underwent. Memorial Gardens is now a dimensional gateway. The cemetery grounds pulse with otherworldly energy. The beings use our reality as a rest stop during their cosmic journeys, and we transformed humans serve as their interpreters and assistants. If you're reading this, the transformation is probably beginning in your area too. The beings return to different locations every few decades, always following the same 300-year cycle. Don't fight the process. Don't be afraid of the brain crystallization. It's not death, it's rebirth. And trust me, existence as a hybrid being is far more beautiful than anything human consciousness could imagine. The mathematics of reality are gorgeous when you can finally understand them properly. Welcome to your evolution.